SEC Media Days, day number 2, South Carolina. Ben Portnoy here with us from the state. Of course, our title sponsor, J.E. Dunn. Top 100 healthiest place to work in America. Doesn't matter about your experience. If you want to change careers, $5 billion in annual revenue, offices all across the Southeast. Great folks. Actually care about their employees, which is what I'm going to talk to you about, because that's what Shane Beamer is building his culture on at South Carolina. Overachieving last year. Does he have the pieces to do it again this year?
I think they do. I mean, you look at, on paper, what this team brings back. You bring back an offensive line that wasn't good, but you do bring back everyone, so there's some continuity there. You've added some transfer pieces offensively. You add Spencer Rattler. That's obviously the big name. Defensively, you bring back, I think, 7 starters from last year's team. Cam Smith at corner. He's going to play a little bit of nickel, too, but he's a guy that I think can be a first-round pick next year. He's that kind of good. You got some talent on the defensive line. The entire coaching staff is back again, outside of 2 guys who you replaced with at tight ends coach Jody Wright, and then defensive line Sterling Lucas, who a lot of people are really high on both those guys. I think this program's in the right spot to take a step forward. Now, the SEC East is wide open, and I think it just kind of depends where, who do you see rising to the top, right? A lot of people think Tennessee. A lot of people think Kentucky. A lot of people think South Carolina. Florida falls in that category. And just, as messy as things could be at Florida, the baseline is still higher than most programs, right? You're still going to have a lot of talent. So can South Carolina jump ahead of those teams? I'm not sold on it yet, but I do think they're in a really good spot to be able to capitalize on what they've brought in over the offseason.
Well, and what's interesting about Spencer Rattler, as we are here in the the College Football Hall of Fame here, media people everywhere talking. What I think is interesting about Spencer Rattler, and I had a chance to talk to Shane about this, the adversity he faced at Oklahoma is what he thinks is going to prepare him to deal with tougher schedules, tougher defense, tougher, everything in the SEC East is going to be tougher than what he faced in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that, everything that's gone on at Oklahoma is pretty well documented, right? Things didn't work out. Caleb Williams comes in. Obviously, Caleb Williams lit the world on fire, and we see what he's been in the time since. I think, that's the thing that's so hard to judge with this team, and frankly with Spencer Rattler, too, and it's what makes it such a mystery, is because if you get the 2020 version of Spencer Rattler, I think it's pretty easy to say South Carolina can be the second or third best team in the East. He's that kind of good. That's a different conversation. But if he looks closer to what he was last year, this team's probably somewhere in the middle of the East. And I think that's why not that the entire season hinges on Spencer Rattler, but it does in a big way. And like you said, with that adversity or, whatever you want to, however, the program wants to phrase it, he's a guy who's been through a lot. He's dealt with a lot of scrutiny since he was a high schooler. I think the idea of him being stuck in, the SEC East and all the cameras and the lights and the action, it's sort of he's been through it on some level. I mean, it's obviously a little different, but I think that at the same time, he's positioned to be able to mitigate those things and handle those things. And I think that, if you're South Carolina, I mean, this is not a program that's had a lot of really good quarterbacks. I mean, Connor Shaw and Steven Garcia in the, last 15 years. But outside of that, Steve Tannehill, Phil Petty, I mean, you've had some guys.
Connor Shaw, I think, is the most underrated quarterback in the history of the SEC. The history of the SEC.
Up there. But, the point is, you could look back 100 years and you could pick 4 guys that have quarterbacked at South Carolina that you think, oh, yeah, that guy was good, right? And I think that's why it's so interesting on paper, is that you've got a guy in Spencer Rattler who genuinely is probably the most talented quarterback that South Carolina's ever had. Now, does that shake out to, 4,000 yards and 35 touchdowns? Maybe not. It might be, 2,500 yards and 10 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. I mean, we just don't know. But it's why this team, like I said, is so hard to peg right now in the offseason.
So fans and their relationship with him and the recruiting, we know he was on the staff previously and did a great job with all those in-state kids. Some of that was just dumb luck. They all came out at the same time. Some of that was Clemson was down, Georgia was down, whatever. And they did a great job, and he was part of that. Have fans bought into all of the stuff that led to the 6 wins? Are they excited? Are they happy about where they're at? Do they think it was, hey, they caught Auburn at the right time, they caught Florida at the right time, they could have lost to Vanderbilt? Where are the fans at with him, and then how is it being felt in the recruiting trail?
Yeah, it's interesting because, depending on who you ask, folks will say, oh, they should have beaten Kentucky where the offense was really bad, or, they had chances against, Tennessee early in the game. They probably should have beaten Missouri, but then you flip it on its head, and it's like you said, you're basically a play away from losing to Vanderbilt. You're about 2 plays away from losing to East Carolina. This team could have been anywhere from really a 4-win team to a 9-win team, and there was about this much space in between. So, I think folks are excited, and I think there's been it's been a little bit overhyped. Like, I'm not ready to say that the South Carolina team is going to go win 9 games, but I think that it's fair to be excited because the reality is when you look at the baseline of what South Carolina was last year, this team is definitely more talented on paper than it was. And I don't think that's a question. Like, you look at the transfers that South Carolina's brought in, whether it's Spencer Rattler, Austin Stogner, I think Juice Wells at receiver from James Madison, I've said it all week. He's the kind of guy that I think if you look up at the end of the season and he's a second-team All-SEC guy, like he's that kind of good. And this team thinks that he can be that kind of good. Throw in the guys you bring back and Jaheim Bell, who people think could be a first-round pick next year at tight end. You got a guy in Christian Beal-Smith at the Wake Forest transfer at running back. I mean, you've got guys and just a lot of pieces that you didn't have a year ago. And Shane was talking about it today, and that, you went from last year kind of figuring out, okay, who are we going to put on the field to, okay, how are we going to get all of these guys on the field and get them the ball? And that's a totally different dynamic, and it's obviously a good problem to have. But I think fans are excited. I think expectations have jumped a little bit because when you do overachieve, you worry, do you overstep a little bit and think, hey, these things aren't linear, but I think that South Carolina is positioned to take advantage of that. Now, whether that shows in the win column or not is sort of TBD.
So what happens if they are clearly a better football team? Like clearly a better football team, but 5-7 or 6-6. How do the fans understand that process, or is this the SEC we're talking about here?
I think people will probably be annoyed if they go and win 6 games or something. I think that's which is crazy, but the thing to me is, and I've said this, for a couple of months, is just like if you're South Carolina, success to you probably this year is you go and win 7 games, you give your chance at an 8th, and you look better in the games you lose, right? You look at last year, and I kind of mentioned a minute ago, but you got run off the field by Tennessee, you got run off the field by Clemson. That can't happen again. Now, that said, if you look competitive in those games get into the fourth quarter, you're playing 1-score games. That's one thing. I think a lot of people can forgive that. But you got a lot of games that kind of hinge on that, and that, you get Tennessee at home. Does that help the situation a little bit? You're at Arkansas week 2. That's the game I circle and say, hey, if you win this game, that's the one where you go, okay, can they win 8 or 9 games? Can they win 6 or 7? So it's just, there's a lot of moving pieces to it, but I think folks would probably be annoyed with another 6-win season. But I think, which is crazy because, look at South Carolina's history, right? There's not that much bowl history, right? South Carolina won its first bowl game in 1987? That's not that long ago in the grand scheme of college football. But I think that's sort of the interesting piece of it, is that I think that South Carolina could have a similar record this year, but there could be a lot of progress made, even if it doesn't necessarily reflect in the sort of win-loss column.
I think that makes complete sense. Of course, all our coverage this week on Fringe Element, of course, 440 Sports, brought to you by J.E. Dunn. Again, 2022 voted best place to work. So if you want to change careers and be fulfilled in life, go check out jedunn.com. Ben, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, just at thestate.com or at bportnoy15 on Twitter. And, I'll be here all week, so should be fun.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for watching. This has been Fringe Element on the 440 Sports Network.